Conventional franchise theory rests on a simple premise. Independent ownership aligns incentives better than centralized control. Yet Chick-fil-A violates nearly every standard assumption of franchising and still produces an outcome most fast food systems struggle to replicate. Unusually high unit performance, unusually consistent operations, and unusually reliable service quality at scale. That contradiction is the point. The Chick-fil-A operator model looks like franchising from a distance, but institutionally, it is something else. In a typical franchise system, the franchisee purchases a bundle of rights. They put significant capital at risk, acquire a store-level business they can often sell later, and retain a meaningful slice of long-term upside. The franchisor provides brand, systems, and supply chain access, but the franchisee owns the asset and bears the financial consequences. Chick-fil-A reverses the architecture. The operator's initial financial requirement is comparatively small relative to most major franchise systems, but that payment does not buy ownership. The corporation retains ownership of the real estate, the building, the equipment, and the store itself. The operator supplies the management labor, the day-to-day execution, and the local leadership. In other words, the corporation retains the residual claim, and the operator receives an income stream tied to performance without equity accumulation and without a traditional exit event. This is where the debate begins. Critics look at the constraints and see corporate control. Supporters look at the outcomes and see a rare case of alignment that actually works. The institutional question is not whether the model is restrictive. It clearly is. The question is what those restrictions are designed to produce and whether that design is ethically defensible. Start with the first and most underappreciated mechanism: selection. Chick-fil-A is famous not only for its stores, but for how aggressively it filters who gets to run them. In most franchise systems, the primary gate is financial capacity. Can you write the check? Can you secure financing? Can you absorb the risk? Chick-fil-A reduces the role of capital and replaces it with something more predictive of the behavior they want: compliance, consistency, operational intensity, and cultural fit. The operator's role is less owner-entrepreneur and more steward-manager, operating inside a tightly specified system. That filtering is not cosmetic. It changes the population. If you remove the ability to buy your way into the system, you reduce the number of applicants whose main objective is asset ownership, portfolio expansion, or eventual resale. What remains are applicants willing to exchange autonomy and equity for a specific bargain: lower financial risk, heavy corporate support, and a high probability path to strong income conditional on performance and adherence. That conditionality is the second mechanism, and it's where the model begins to feel cult-like to outsiders. In a conventional franchise, once you own the store, the franchisor's control is partly limited by the fact that you have property rights and legal protections. You can often sell. You can often operate multiple units. You can sometimes push back. You have leverage because you own something. In the operator model, the operator's primary asset is not the store, it is the relationship. The continuation of that relationship becomes the central enforcement tool. If you cannot sell the location, cannot meaningfully deviate from the system, and can be replaced if you don't meet standards, then the incentive landscape changes. The operator's upside is tied to operational excellence and compliance. And the operator's downside is not merely lower profits, it is losing the platform entirely. From an institutional design perspective, that is a powerful solution to the classic principal-agent problem in franchising. In standard systems, franchisees often have incentives to locally optimize even when it harms the brand. They may cut labor, stretch quality controls, or shave costs in ways that improve short-term margins but degrade long-term reputation. The franchisor wants uniformity and brand protection, but the franchisee, as a residual claimant, may prefer a different trade-off. Chick-fil-A resolves this tension by collapsing the space in which local deviation can exist. The model centralizes key decisions and standardizes operations, and it uses the threat of replacement to enforce compliance. That's not a moral judgment, it's a structural observation. The system does not rely primarily on trust. It relies on governance. And governance is not only contractual, it is behavioral. A major part of Chick-fil-A's perceived quality is not the food alone. It is the consistency of service behaviors, the speed of operations, and the predictability of the experience. Those outcomes are notoriously hard to maintain across thousands of locations when each one is independently owned by someone whose primary incentive is profit maximization on their own terms. Chick-fil-A's model produces a different internal logic. Because operators do not own the asset, they are less incentivized to extract value through short-term cost-cutting that risks brand damage, especially if the system is designed to monitor and enforce standards. Because operators' continued participation depends on performance and adherence, compliance becomes a rational choice, not merely a cultural aspiration. In that environment, centralized control is not an unfortunate side effect. It is the point. Now we reach the ethical question. Many people hear low fee, high control, and conclude exploitation. The argument sounds like this. The operator contributes enormous labor and managerial skill, drives millions in revenue, and yet leaves with no asset. If they do not build equity, are they being denied fair compensation for the value they create? But ethics and institutional arrangements depends on the full trade. In a conventional franchise, equity is earned partly because risk is borne. Franchisees assume debt. They are exposed to catastrophic loss. They can fail and still owe the bank. They can lose years of savings. Equity is not only a reward, it is compensation for risk and capital commitment. In Chick-fil-A's model, the corporation carries much more of the capital burden. The operator is not gambling a life savings on a single location. That shift reduces the operator's financial downside and increases the corporation's. The operator trades ownership for a form of de-risk participation in a high-performing platform. That is why the model can be attractive even without equity. It offers access to a highly engineered system with a high likelihood of strong income without the same magnitude of financial exposure. So is it fair? It depends on what fairness means. If fairness means proportional claim on long-term value based on contribution, critics will argue the operator is underclaimed. If fairness means a voluntary contract where both sides understand the terms and benefit from the exchange, then it becomes harder to label as inherently unethical. The operator is not coerced. The bargain is explicit. Many applicants compete for it precisely because they prefer this trade-off. Less capital at risk, more corporate infrastructure, and a clearer path to stable earnings. Still, the critique doesn't disappear because the power relationship remains asymmetric. The corporation sets the rules, owns the assets, and retains the right to replace the operator. That creates dependency. And dependency is the shadow side of alignment. A model can be economically coherent and still concentrate power in ways that feel socially uncomfortable, especially when the operator's identity and livelihood are tied to continued approval. This is why the cult-like framing persists, not because the system requires charisma, but because it requires submission to a comprehensive rule set. The operator model doesn't merely control product standards. It controls the operational philosophy. It reduces individual discretion. It filters for people who will accept those constraints. It rewards conformity with income and platform access. And it punishes deviation with exclusion. At the same time, this is precisely why the model works. Most systems cannot achieve both scale and consistency because they cannot simultaneously solve for incentive alignment, quality enforcement, and local execution. Chick-fil-A solves the problem by selecting operators who want structure, reducing capital-driven incentives that produce desperate cost-cutting, and retaining centralized ownership to enforce standards and reinvest rapidly. There is also a less discussed element: cultural reinforcement. When an institution asks individuals to operate with intense discipline and reduced autonomy, it must offer something beyond money to sustain commitment. Culture functions as coordination technology. It supplies meaning, identity, and shared norms that reduce friction. Whether one views Chick-fil-A's cultural posture as admirable, irrelevant, or problematic, institutionally it plays a role. It strengthens compliance, reduces variance, and stabilizes behavior at scale. So the model is not magic. It is engineered constraint. It produces quality not by trusting every operator to independently choose excellence, but by constructing a system where excellence is the rational, enforced, and culturally reinforced equilibrium. If you want the cleanest conclusion, it's this: Chick-fil-A's operator model is not traditional franchising. It is a governance system designed to protect brand integrity by prioritizing organizational coherence over individual ownership. It replaces the franchisee's equity incentive with a continuation incentive. It uses selectivity to control the population, centralized ownership to control the assets, and enforceable standards to control the outcome. Whether you call that cult-like control or alignment-focused ethics depends on which values you prioritize: autonomy and ownership, or consistency and institutional performance. But the deeper point is structural. In markets where misaligned incentives routinely degrade quality, Chick-fil-A demonstrates a difficult truth. Exceptional outcomes often emerge not from maximal freedom, but from carefully designed constraint. For continued institutional analysis of governance structures, capital architectures, and incentive systems, subscribe.